And our next speaker is the Principal, Cultural Attractions and Research at Thinkwell Group. She's an old friend of mine. She embodies a great combination of technology, science, as well as storytelling. Please welcome Cynthia Sharpe.
Oh, I can tell it's been like an hour since lunch and you're all starting to flag. Hopefully, flaily Muppet Jazz Hands Girl will wake you up. My name is Cynthia Sharpe. You can identify the museum dorks because we stand at the lectern. And I'm here to talk to you about the power of why not. But before that, I owe you an apology. You're about to drink from a fire hose. I talk fast. I talk even faster when I'm nervous, and like many of yesterday's speakers, I'm copying to being nervous up here. So this is gonna take about 3.5 minutes, and then we're gonna have 45 minutes for Q&A. I hope the ideas and projects that I'm gonna share with you spur conversation, ignite your imagination, and in some cases may actually convince you to book a trip to Europe like immediately. So let's rock. Why is a really fantastic question, but why not is also a really great question. And when we're working with clients or even on our own internal teams, we will often push back and ask why not. And I'm not talking about the let's make a hip hop musical about Alexander Hamilton level of dream big why not. I'm talking about a much more granular why not. When you ask why, you get this. I can feel you cringing. You've all been in meetings like this. You ask why, and a lot of times it devolves to the professional equivalent of, because I'm your mother and I said so. That's not helpful. Why not is a shorthand way of saying, tell me what the impediments are, so that we can break down what all those problems are and come to a better place together. So, I am gonna take you through 4 case studies, and I have to say, none of these are Thinkwell projects. At Thinkwell, we are geeks, dorks, and nerds all rolled into one. We're not just the president of the Hair Club for Men, we're clients too. We go to stuff all over the world. We eagerly and dorkily share it with each other on Facebook and Twitter and in meetings and stuff like that. So the 4 things I'm about to go through, we have no involvement in whatsoever. We haven't worked with these institutions in any capacity. We're just big honkin' fans. Okay, so this is gonna be audience participatory. I'm sorry, wake up. What's the problem with displaying musical instruments in a museum? Yeah, you can't hear them. And if you're a visitor and you're presented with a musical instrument, what do you wanna do? You wanna play it. What's the problem with playing musical instruments in a museum? Sound, what else? You're gonna break it. If it's in a museum, it's in a museum for a reason. So, has anybody been to the Museum of Anthropology at UBC? Yay! Okay, gorgeous, 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 amazing museum. Built in 1971, underwent a major renovation and expansion that took 2 phases. Second phase opened in January 2010. And they asked themselves a really huge why not question. They asked themselves, why not involve the actual communities from whom our objects came in the curatorial process? As part of this renovation, they opened a 10,000 object space called the Multiversity Galleries. And it's visible storage, and it's incredible, and there are touchscreens where you can navigate your way through, and you can hunt for everything that has a monkey on it, or everything that came from Micronesia, or what have you. I could literally talk to you guys about 2 hours of the cultural, anthropological, and sociological, and cognitive psychology implications of involving the communities and telling their own stories and how it influenced the liberal writing and the organization and all that, and you would all fall asleep, and I'm really sorry. I'm not gonna do that. But this was a process in which they literally asked themselves, why not, over and over and over and over again. And if you go to this institution, you will see a radically different experience than what they had previously. Now, objects are grouped not by the stereotypical ways that we group them, not by here are all the fabric objects, or here's everything from this one place, but they're grouped by how they're used, and they're grouped by from whom they came. So all the materials that, for instance, a Tlingit fisherman would use over the course of his day is right there in a pull-out drawer for a kid to discover. And so it means something. The objects are grouped by the story they tell, and by the story that the communities themselves gave when they gave those objects. But to be really reductionist, big part of culture is music. These are slit drums. They're gorgeous. What do you not want people to do to these? Touch them. You don't want them breaking. Do you see any glass around them? These are not enclosed. These are hanging open. You might, if you can see, there's like a little rope down at the bottom. Is that going to stop anybody, particularly a 13-year-old boy? No. It's not meant to. It's literally just to keep people from crawling under them for safety reasons and to not trip. They asked the question, why not let people touch the stuff? Why don't you let people touch the stuff? You don't let them touch the stuff because you don't want the stuff to break. What if it was okay if the stuff broke? We're an anthropology museum. How do we get stuff? What do you mean? These are still made. The ones that they have out on the floor are ones that they can replace. Do they want to replace them? No, they would hope that their guests would be respectful enough in interacting with them that they wouldn't then have to go spend some money and replace them. But ultimately, if these break, it's okay. And it's actually part of their story of the preservation of these traditional wood carving forms that's still used today to make drums like this. They have a couple of slit drums which are very valuable and which you cannot touch, and those are displayed accordingly so that you can't touch them. But if you go into the gallery is alive with sound. The gallery is alive with sound because they asked, why not let the guests touch the stuff? What does it take us to allow the guests to touch the stuff? And so they did this. All right, has anybody been here? Man, you've been everywhere. I'm gonna stump you at some point during this. Okay, so this is the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde, Denmark, and it is a box. The Viking Ship Museum exists in Roskilde because literally it's where they found the ships. It turns out that centuries ago, the Vikings wanted to block off access to a natural harbor. And so they purposely scuttled 5 ships at the mouth of the harbor. The mud, the type of mud that they had there and the salinity of the water was a perfect preservative for the wood. And so this is the site of the most significant nautical archaeological find of Viking ships ever. And so they built a museum there. They built a box. It's such a box. It's a box with a really pretty view, but it's a box with ticketing and a store and objects and nothing else. And they realized that they were telling less than half their story, because in addition to being a museum, they are the leader in research into Viking ship construction. They give grant money, they are the site of, they do tons of scientific research on the building materials, on the building techniques. They're the ones who figured out how this stuff was made and transformed our understanding of how the Vikings roamed around a pretty sizable chunk of the globe and took over a lot of stuff. And they weren't telling that story in this box. So they asked themselves, what if we let our visitors do some of those techniques? They can't do those techniques in a box. Some of those techniques involve fire, sharp objects, not stuff that you want to do in here. So they started going down the list and they asked themselves, how can we make that happen? And they came up with an expansion plan. The museum, you can't see it, it's off to the side, to the right. This is the plan for the expansion, and you'll notice that it essentially looks like a bunch of lean-tos. So they're semi-open air, so to address some of the safety concerns around fire. It's like, oh, okay, we can't do a lot of this stuff inside. There are chemicals and things like that. We'll put it outside. Well, the weather's pants. Well, we'll make sheds. And so suddenly, instead of building a super expensive new museum with all of the handling all of the safety handling that they would need, this was much, much cheaper. to build, and it was going to be much faster to build, and it was going to allow them to do a lot more revealing of the rest of their mission to their visitors. This image actually gives a hint to what is the best awful project problem I've ever heard of in a museum. Can anybody tell what it is? So when they started construction, like 11 months before the Queen was supposed to show up and cut the ribbon on the new site, they found 9 more ships. Oopsie. They're bad. So they had to do like the fastest archaeological excavation ever. You'll notice that the ships, the image sizes indicate relative size to one another. This discovery blew open our understanding of the Vikings and the kinds of ships they used and how far they could travel and how they traveled and what they did and how they behaved. So this was a profoundly important find that they were then sort of under the gun to deal with. They did manage to open on time miraculously. And so this opened through 97, 99. You'll notice that there's access to the water. And it let them do, this expansion let them do a lot of new things. It gave them a place to put the reconstructed boats that they built as part of their research process. It allowed them to add programming weeks, theme weeks. They do weeks on what food and cooking was like back then. They do blacksmithing weeks. They do ship construction weeks, where specialists come in and do lots more demos than usual for the guests. It allowed them to add on a ton of hands-on activities, and many of these are monetized. You actually have to pay a little extra here, a couple kroner there, a couple kroner there, and depending upon the intensity of the activity, you get to do more or less. But all of this made it a much more hands-on experience. It increased their hold times, it increased their length of stay, it increased their per caps in their retail and their cafe, but there was one big guest expectation that still wasn't met. Can anybody guess what it was? You didn't get to ride a ship. So they said, why not? Why not make it so that our visitors can go in a recreated Viking longboat and row that sucker out on the open water? Do we have anybody from like legal and liability here? Okay, this is a bad idea for so many reasons. So many reasons. Safety, drowning. They worked with the Federal Safety Commission in Denmark to come up with a specialized safety training program for all of their facilitators and all the guests who go on it. So it far exceeds just, hey, here's a life vest, good luck. What are some other challenges with this? Weather. The Danes conveniently are really used to the weather being pants, and they have the best inclement weather gear of anyone, I think. But on their website, they make a big deal of, if the weather's really lousy, we're not going out. But if it's just raining a little bit, we are. Come prepared. So they pull no punches on that. What's another problem? Can little kids row an oar that size? No. So together with the Federal Safety Commission in Denmark, they had to come up with a plan for how to deal with kids. And the way that they deal with kids is they're really honest about it. They're like, if you're 14 or under, you can't row. We have 2 benches on each boat reserved for littles. If we sell that many tickets for littles before you get to the ticket booth, sorry, you and your kids aren't going on that boat. If we have capacity on another one, you'll go on the next one. The other issue with this, obviously, is capacity, total capacity. So they made this an upcharge, and it's a bigger upcharge than any of the little hands-on activities. It's a pretty significant one. It's 75 to 110 Danish kroner, depending upon when you come there. And it has been ridiculously successful. They started doing it just like a couple days a week on the weekends kind of thing, and then they're like, oh, we need to expand it to when the high schools are out on vacation. I was like, oh, we need to be doing 9 of these per day every day during the summer holidays. It's been so successful that you can now book it online. They have a 6-hour-long version that they do periodically through the year on Saturdays, where you can spend 6 hours rowing and sailing like a Viking. It has had it has had a profound impact on their bottom line, to the extent that they've now built a new, glorious, much more upscale restaurant on site. They have a hostel on site as well. They don't actually participate in the Copenhagen card program, but Copenhagen card gives you free public transit to Roskilde, so it's super easy to get here. They participate with the Visit Denmark program. Visit Denmark is on their lawn doing activities during holidays and on the weekends, and it has increased their visitorship enormously, even since opening that expansion, at figuring out why not put people in the boats and put them out on the open water. Once they cracked that nut, their visitorship went up even more. So those are two things that are done and open, and you can book yourself a trip to Copenhagen and go be a Viking, like right now. I'm gonna talk through two current case studies. Who is here from Chicago? I know we got a couple. You're not allowed to answer the next question. Name me a cultural attraction in Chicago. Shed, Bean, Science and Industry, Navy Pier. Art Institute, I'm not gonna talk about any of this. What are the three venues here? Adler Planetarium, and yet nobody said Adler when I said name me a cultural attraction. So in Chicago, many of the major museums are on public parkland. They're on Chicago Park District land. So they're referred to as the museums in the park, and they share attendance data. This data is a couple years old, but you'll notice that it's like, woo, Shed, woo, Art Institute, woo, Field and MSI, aw, Adler. You're so cute. Wah, wah. The Adler used to have over 500,000 visitors a year, and then they slapped an admission fee on the door, and they cratered, like many institutions do when they slap an admission fee on the door. So they're not doing awesomely, or they weren't. So they asked themselves a series of why not questions, because they, like many of their Chicago brethren, were doing many of the same things. They were doing school programming. They were running around to PTA events and community events, and for them, they would haul out the telescope to some school fair out in Lombard, an hour and 30-minute drive, if you're lucky, from the Shed kind of thing. They were doing all this stuff and running themselves ragged with far less revenue than the big dogs and a much smaller staff. So, they were like, why not? Why not get rid of school programs? Really? That's kicking over a pretty big sacred cow. But what they came down to was schools are visitors. And if you make great programming that works for your general admission guest and your school guests, everybody wins. And you're not stuck maintaining school facilities that only get used when a school has booked a field trip in. You're not stuck paying for staff who deal only with those school groups and aren't available out on the floor to deal with your regular guests. What do we have to lose? So they started doing their programming and flex training their floor staff such that they could deal with a school group on the fly, a family group on the fly, a Boy Scout group, a bunch of adults in for one of the nerd nights, what have you. And they've been able to service all of those populations really, really well. They also said, screw it, to schlepping their telescopes around. Their revised mission, their revised attitude is about empowering through doing, getting people to start doing stuff for themselves. Part of the reason that they could kick the whole school group programming to the curb was, okay, how many people here have even heard of next-gen science standards? You are a party dude. So in the Wayback Machine, in the 90s, if you were an education manager at a science museum, when you made your exhibit, or when the new exhibit was under development, you would make the grid of science standards. And here's all of the really distinct content that this exhibit is going to teach. It was essentially a punch list of content that a teacher could then take to their principal and say, this is why you should let me take the kids out of school for a day. I'm going to tick off all of these Illinois state science standards. I'm going to tick off all of these national benchmarks for science literacy, Project 2061 science standards. It's worth it. It's worth the price of the bus. We don't have that anymore. We've got next-gen science standards, which are much more interdisciplinary. They're process-based. They're about learning through doing, as opposed to every 8th grader shall graduate knowing precisely the following about earth science. And so it took the shackles off of science museums, Adler in particular, because they were no longer super tied to teaching earth science in a really specific way with a really specific set of definitions and content and crap that they had to get across to every 8th grader in the state of Illinois. So just as the shackles were off for school groups, the shackles were also off in terms of outreach, because that shift meant that they could take the attitude of, build your own telescope. And then you'll have it. You'll have it for whatever special things your elementary school or junior high or high school does. So now, instead of dog and ponying it to every school out in the suburbs or every community fair, they're like, great, here's the list of stuff that you need to buy at Lowe's. Have fun. Make your own. It'll be awesome. The process is the product. We heard a lot about demographics yesterday. Adler asked themselves, why not design to something different? For a long time, they were really doing the, okay, we get kids in this age group, we get adults in this age group, And what they realized pretty quickly was that everybody is a nerd about something, and if you appeal to the passionate nerd, that transcends age bands. It transcends demographic bands. So now, for the past couple of years, they've done Adler After Dark, which is fantastically successful for them. It sells out regularly. It's themed differently each time. This was obviously a Star Trek night. They've done Star Wars. They've done 1950s sci-fi B-movie night. They've done all kinds of stuff. They host yoga in their big dome theater to utilize it differently. They also ask themselves, why not do smaller exhibits? It is a pain in the butt to raise $10, $20 million for a new exhibit. And it's a pain to keep it relevant as new discoveries come out. So they decided to treat one of their new exhibit processes as essentially a learning lab. And instead of doing a makerspace, they call it a community design space. This was actually designed by a group of college students from IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology. And their brief, they were like, well, who are we designing this for? Again, back to that demographic question. And the museum told them, you're designing it for passionate nerds like you. Doesn't matter what age. So it's not brightly colored. It's not primary colors like you would expect one of the little kid maker spaces to be or what have you. It's incredibly small footprint. It's about 750, 900 square feet. The tables are purposely designed to be community oriented. You have to sit with other people. There are no instructions. There's a build something to do X, and there's no model to build from. There's no step-by-step instructions. There's no this is how you do it. There's a facilitator in there in case you need help finding something. But it's go, try, experiment, do. And then there are stations around the room where you can test them in air tunnels and test them in other ways and see how well your invention works and go back and do it again. This is so popular, they've actually had to add shelving because people had already bought planetarium show tickets, would run out of time, would need a place to stash their thing, go run and do the planetarium show, and then come back to go back to playing in this space. I'm gonna go faster now. All right. And they own their swagger. They have retitled, they've rebranded with Space is Freaking Awesome. You can imagine what the conversation was like with the board for this. But their attitude was, why not? We have moon rocks, we have the universe. Why are we couching it in science can be hard and physics might be scary and we know. So they own it. They have a food truck that goes around Chicago and they give out astronaut ice cream and deploy experiments on the streets and invite people in to play with them. We're gonna kick it old school really, 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 really fast because I'm getting the hook. Shakespeare's Globe Theater. I loves me some historic reconstruction. Oh my God. Behold. So Shakespeare's Globe is lovingly recreated. They did massive research to make it work. Okay, well, you know, historic reconstruction is great. Let's go do some what do you mean I can't hang a new lighting rig. They are on their third artistic director in their history, Emma Rice, who said, why not? Why not hang a lighting rig and some sound support? Not permanent, not drilling into the structure. The green thatch roof will be totally fine. Let's just say that didn't go well. When they previewed Midsummer Night's Dream, she and the Globe were absolutely pilloried in the press by exactly who you would expect. Think back to that I can feel your soul dying moment. The donors, the academics, they were appalled.
Come, madam, come all, rest my powers defy, until I labor, I in labor lie.
It was the best show I've ever seen in my life. It was so amazing.
It was amazing.
Amazing. It was so enjoyable.
So good.
I felt like I was transported to like this different world.
It was fantastic. The actors were brilliant.
Amazing.
Absolutely fantastic. Oh, we like the wall.
Yeah, the wall was
really
great.
amazing. And we like bottom.
Yeah. I think Puck the Fairy is really, really, really cool.
Anything Puck does, I was just dying.
Puck! Yeah!
I feel like Puck did the best job. Yes. Her little hands.
The way she interacts with the audience and all the funny jokes and innuendos is just absolutely hilarious.
Just thought it was absolutely amazing. The dancing, the singing, it was so funny. We just laughed all the way through.
Even if you don't know the storyline, definitely give it a watch.
And if you go to London, go see Midsummer Night's Dream.
Go to the Shakespeare's Club.
Yeah.
It's an experience.
Yeah.
Buy a ticket now.
Definitely buy a ticket. Yeah, go for standing, get the full experience.
Over hill and over dale, there a bush, there a briar, over park, over pale, there a flood and there a fire.
So why piss off your donors and your scholars? Because it did better than any production they'd ever had. Longest queue lines for standby tickets ever. So far, their rate of membership subscriptions for next season, anecdotally, are outpacing any previous year. It is an absolutely transformative staging of Midsummer Night's Dream. And it was one where they said, why not put up a neon sign that says rock the ground? Why not perch a sitar player high up above the stage and have them playing the whole time? Why not make Helena Helenus and suddenly transform Demetrius's storyline into one of self-identity and self-abnegation and self-reflection? And ultimately, it was quite the triumph for Ms. Rice. And it's reignited the conversation around the role of culture and theater in London in a way that no other production has in recent memory. And for a final why not, the Globe said, why not do a live telecast of our last run of it on September 11th, this past month? And why not put it online and make it available to everyone anywhere in the world for 6 months? So if you want to see what Ms. Rice, because she's not only the artistic director of the Globe, she personally directed this one. If you want to see what Ms. Rice and her team did with Midsummer, and I highly encourage you to do so, you can go on the BBC One player and watch the production. It's available for about 5.5 more months. So ask why, but ask why not. Why not let guests touch the stuff? Why not let them get in the boat and get wet and possibly take a drink? Why not just own it, own your stuff. Say what you do is really cool and really awesome. I love the Smithsonian American Art Museum for doing the art of the video game exhibit because they're like, it's beautiful and it's awesome and we love this stuff. I love their passion for doing that. Why not push the boundaries and trust the audience to buckle up and go for the ride with you? So ask why, but also ask why not. Thanks. Sorry for going over.
No. We're okay. We're actually going to bring Scott Rosenfeld back out. We got about 5 minutes for some couple of questions. If you guys want to go 1 second. And
Do you have a microphone?
Yep.
You guys can. Got some? I can't see. Somebody pick. Questions for either Scott or Cynthia? Yeah. All the way in back. Oh, we have a mic that's not
Thanks.
coming up.
Yeah.
Go ahead and yell.
Go for it, yell.
This is about consumer awareness with lighting, so great presentation, by the way. First time I've ever seen in my life that you walk into a Home Depot and it's no longer about size or wattage. They're actually educating consumers on CRI and lumens and how that actually fits in space. Does that change the work you do, actually having consumers and individuals realize what lighting is and how it fits in their lives?
It's changed my career, and within LED, because there are things that were available to us that I didn't dream were available before. And now with like light bulbs that can change color on demand, there are all these attributes that all of us have the capacity to use all of these properties of light that we didn't dream of. How we use them takes a mastery which I'm interested to see how deep people will go into actually learning how to use these things well. And I think there's going to be a lot of confusion in the process. And I actually, just looking at the labels on the Home Depot and Lowe's aisle, I see a lot of confusing information out there.
Right. Any other questions? Yeah.
The presentation was fantastic. Could you talk a little bit more about the collaboration with the artists? Because you were having such a tremendously profound effect on the whole emotional appeal of the artwork. You completely change it in the staging you have. So I would assume you work close. You mentioned Maya Lin, but what about some of the other pieces?
It really depends on every artist. A lot of artists don't have a palette for light. They're masters of their particular craft, but what I showed you today, breaking down what light is, most people haven't seen it, and it's difficult to figure out really what can we control in this thing. So with Gabriel, he had never worked with a lighting design. His partner is actually a video projection designer, but I'm the first lighting designer that he's ever worked with. I'm also the first lighting designer at my museum. So it's a pretty new thing. With Gabriel, he was actually patient. He had spent so many hours sculpting that by hand. He was actually quite excited to work with me and really see the different things we could do so we could figure out how to see his artwork. Does that answer your question? Some artists are not as patient, and they're like, just go for it.
Is anyone else? Because I've got a question for Cynthia. Anyone?
This is a question for Cynthia as well. In the process of Ask Why Not, in either in your experience or within the case studies, if you've spoken to these institutions, how do they approach that with their boards about the sacred cows? Do they have to come in with case studies of others? Do they have to come in with research, or do they have to just try to talk them through it?
Great question. It varies. How's that for a non-answer? In some cases, the why not, it's the same issue that a couple of other speakers have spoken to, that so much of what we're doing is bespoke that you can't point to a case study and say, they did it and survived. The peasants did not come with pitchforks and torches to the museum. So sometimes it's a matter of building confidence through survey work, brand assessment, working with a really great outside evaluation firm. The Adler, for instance, worked really closely with a branding agency that's allied with the institution. They've got board member involvement to do some testing. And obviously there is no other institution that has put the word, no other mainstream institution that has put the word freaking in their brand tagline. So they weren't going to be able to point to somebody else. But what they were able to do was do this research. They went to the board, and they knew that they had a board that was of the right temperament. There were a couple of folks on the board who were a little bit more old school, a little bit more, really, I'm not so sure about this. They went and they talked to some other board members first to sort of help build that confidence level and have some allies on the board, but they came in with as much research as they could. For other institutions where it's things like, looking at how you're making your visible storage work, talking to other institutions that have involved the indigenous communities that have provided the objects, that kind of thing, those types of cases, it's much easier for them to go to sister institutions and say, how did you do this? How did you get your board on board with allowing this kind of thing? So it's a little bit of a mixed bag there. The Globe, they pretty much just said, the recreation is great. Shakespeare did not live under a flight approach path to Heathrow. We got to do something about the sound. And the board made the decision, we will suffer the slings and arrows of the donors whose names are on the cobbles leading into the theater, and we'll deal with the academics being upset. And they did.
Excellent. That was actually my question. Seriously,
There we
it really
go.
was. Great. Thank you both. Wonderful presentations.
Thanks, everyone.